Has to work quickly. Down to 6 seconds. Carr going down again. And it's Quentin Williams this time for the Jets.
Toward the middle in the air. Picked off. Brian Poole to the end zone. Touchdown. Hunter to beat, and the punter brings him down. Braden Mann saved a touchdown most likely.
Looks right. Fires a bomb down the right sideline again for Mims. What a catch by Denzel Mims.
And welcome back to another episode of the Cool Your Jets podcast. We're your hosts, Ben Blessington and Michael Nania. Michael, day 4 in the books for the Jets free agency. A relatively busy day, especially compared to days 2 and 3. A lot to talk about today. But first, your instant reaction to the Jets' 3 signings today.
Yeah, this was a really eventful day, kind of making up for the quiet state of the past couple days. 3 new signings coming from other teams. Also, we got to see the other signings from the previous few days announced officially. I just love Carl Lawson. I absolutely love this man. His energy, his positivity, his enormous smile. I'm in love with this guy. I absolutely am.
I mean, that's nice. I certainly liked the video he posted after he got his Jets goodie bag, and he seems pretty hyped to be a Jets player. I think Hardy's press conference was pretty damn cool. Him getting up and talking about why he's so good on special teams because of his heart. But yeah, Lawson saying that the main reason he came to New York was Saleh. He looked up on YouTube and saw videos of Robert Saleh, and it inspired him. And he really, valued the type of communicator he was, and he saw the role that he could fill in this defense. And that's, as a Jets fan, I mean, especially going from Adam Gase, which, the past free agencies, it's always been the last 2 free agencies, I guess, it was the Jets got to pay the Adam Gase tax. Clearly players are coming in here to play for Robert Saleh, and that's only something that's going to grow the more success that he has, because he hasn't done anything. This is still a 2-14 team. But just based off his reputation alone, he's been able to build a top staff. And then he's getting guys like Carl Lawson, who I feel like some of the media are underrating. I think the people who are underrating just don't know the quality of player Carl Lawson is. That really the only thing that's held him back was the injuries early in his career. Because when he's been on the field, he's been among the best pass rushers. I was reading the next gen stats that he might be even the leader in burst off the line of scrimmage since he came.
Yeah, and anyone who criticizes him as a non-star is just scouting sacks, which is not a good stat at all for evaluating pass rushers.
I saw Tony Pauline say that he'd rather have Trey Hendrickson. I mean, I guess the Bengals agreed with him. But you look at the difference in Trey Hendrickson's tape and Carl Lawson's tape, and don't get me wrong, Hendrickson's a great player, but the Jets have not had a player like Lawson in a long time. You look at Lawson's tape, he's consistently pressuring the quarterback, and the sacks that he gets are earned because there's nobody else on that Cincinnati defense, helping him at all, especially in the secondary. He doesn't have much time to get after the quarterback. And you look at all of his plays, and they're all pretty much insane reps that he's doing all by himself.
Yeah,
Hendrickson
and I think the big difference between them is that, I mean, Hendrickson had a great season, but he's a little bit of a hustle pressure kind of guy. And those are great. You want those, but that's not who you want your big money pass rusher to be. Carl Lawson has he's an elite pass rusher, just plain simple. Forget the sacks. He has the 4th best pressure rate over the past 4 seasons among all edge rushers, behind only Von Miller and the 2 Bosas. And his consistency is also what's great. He's had injuries, and early in his career, he didn't play that much, but he's been, in terms of his efficiency, elite his whole career. Him and Joey Bosa are the only edge rushers have a pressure rate above 13% in each of the past 4 seasons. So the consistency of all 4 years, he's a great chance of keeping it going because he's not a one-year wonder like Hendrickson was, having only 1 good season. He's been doing this his whole career. It's just been getting on the field, and he got healthy, stayed healthy this past season, improved his run defense enough so the Bengals could trust him to be a full-time player, and he got more snaps, and his production went up. He had the 4th most pressures among edge rushers last year, so he's an elite player pretty much in every aspect.
And look, he's built like Thanos. The only thing that's going to hold him back are the injuries, like you said, because if he stays healthy for at least 14 games this season, in my mind, especially playing next to Quentin Williams and John Franklin Myers and whoever else the Jets had, you're looking at a guy who's going to be putting up 10 plus sacks. I know he hasn't done it in his career yet, but I'm willing to put money that Carl Lawson's going to have a lot of success here. But this podcast is about the guys the Jets signed today. Keenan Cole, the receiver from the Jaguars. There was rumblings earlier in the day about the Jets talking to JuJu Smith-Schuster. Michael, I know we talked about it a lot in the last podcast. You seem to be against it. I was for it. I mean, I think part of the reason is Juju's the last guy in the market that if I get that tweet from Adam Schefter or Ian Rappaport, I'm going to have a let's go reaction. And then every other guy is just like, oh, cool. The Jets signed him. And so that was part of it, but also the logic of signing a guy like JuJu and cutting Crowder makes sense. And we can debate this a little bit because look, one of the biggest criticisms of this podcast is me and you are pretty much in lockstep pretty much every point of the step of the way, but we're at a bit of a disagreement here. I think that if the Jets were to sign JuJu Smith-Schuster, because look, it's not like they were going to give him an exorbitant contract. Clearly, this was an example of a guy who thought he might be able to get $15-17 million a year. The market necessarily wasn't there. So he's turning around looking at cheaper deals. The Jets, there was a report that it was between returning to the Steelers on a 1-year deal and the Jets on a multi-year deal. Hey, look, it could still happen. But from the Jets perspective, look, Jamison Crowder's last year is most likely going to be this year. He's reaching 30. He's not an ideal scheme fit. I'm curious to see how he plays in this offense. He's going to be asked to do a lot of things that he hasn't really done. Even if he's really good, though, he's going to be a free agent next year. The Jets probably aren't going anywhere this year. You can cut Crowder, sign a guy like JuJu Smith-Schuster. The money's going to be negligible. You're going to get a 24-year-old who's more versatile than Crowder. And you could turn around and probably trade Crowder for a 4th or maybe a 5th round pick. It made a lot of sense in my eyes. And from JuJu's perspective, I think he probably returns to Pittsburgh. I think it makes sense for him to go back where he has familiarity, pad his stats for another year, hit the free agent market again when he's 25. But, the draw of New York building his brand. And hell, you can make the argument that the Jets, especially considering that the free options the Jets have a quarterback are either his former college quarterback, Deshaun Watson, or a drafted rookie, highly, picked 2 overall. You can make the argument the Jets are in a better QB situation than the Steelers, who are stuck with Ben Roethlisberger, who has some question marks as he's getting up there in age. But the Jets pivoted to Keenan Cole. Look, it doesn't necessarily exclude them from turning around and still cutting Crowder and signing JuJu. Hell, they might do it tomorrow. It does seem, though, that this is more of the type of move they would make rather than giving out, a $12 million deal to Corey Davis, presumably an $11 or $12 million deal to JuJu Smith-Schuster, and then a $5 million deal to Keenan Cole. It just seems like a lot of money to allocate to the receiver position, which is a position we know that I shouldn't say we know, but Douglas didn't allocate pretty much any funds last year, didn't want to pay Robbie Anderson. And this is an offense that doesn't necessarily require elite receivers. I mean, obviously every offense wants good receivers, but this is a 12 personnel offense. They're going to run 11 personnel, but you could make the argument that the second tight end is more important than the slot receiver. So Michael, I guess kind of take me through your process of hating the JuJu Smith-Schuster news, and why you think that, presuming the Jets don't cut Crowder and sign JuJu on Friday, that Joe Douglas made the right call.
Okay, so I don't completely hate the idea. I acknowledge the upside of it. JuJu has shown upside in the league that Crowder has not touched before and will not touch. What JuJu did his first 2 seasons was incredible at 21 and 22 years old to be putting up over 2,300 yards over his first 2 seasons and averaging almost 10 yards a target was ridiculous. He was really good. But the past 2 seasons, the production just hasn't been there. And he's been one of the least efficient high volume guys in the league. And I think that's just the biggest question with me. You don't know which one of those 2 guys you're getting. And between those first 2 seasons, they had Le'Veon Bell, they had Antonio Brown. Then those 2 guys are removed. He becomes the focal point and his production goes out the window. So I think it's just a shot for the fences.
I mean, he had 9 touchdowns last year. I mean,
he did, but he was also like 90th in yards per target and pretty much every single other category besides touchdowns. He was like bottom 10. So I think that's just a question of which guy you would be getting. Because if you replace him with Crowder, I think you know what you're getting with Crowder. I think you're getting not a solid guy. I think too many people act like he's just decent. He's really good. He was 7th in slot receiving yards over the past 2 seasons. And that's even though in 2020, there were at least 3-4 touchdowns, long touchdowns that he could have had where he's wide open and either Darnold or Flacco didn't hit him. So he could have been even more productive with an average quarterback. So I think he's a really good player. And with Smith-Schuster, we've seen the upside that he could be a superstar player. That's what we saw the first 2 years. But the past 2 seasons, he just really wasn't very good. And so you don't know which one of those two players you're getting. So I think that's a big question mark. And I also think another thing is I don't think he's as great of a fit in the offense as everyone says. I think people are looking for that guy who could make plays with the ball in his hands over the middle, a great yak guy. But Smith-Schuster hasn't really been that. Crowder's yak numbers across the board are better over the past 2 seasons than Smith-Schuster's are. And over the course of his career, Smith-Schuster's strength has really been the intermediate and deep game. And the Jets already have 2 guys who specialize in those areas, in Mims and Corey Davis. Now they have another one in Keelan Cole. So if they swapped out Crowder for Smith-Schuster, then you're losing that underneath separator, an elite underneath separator in Crowder, for another guy who specializes in sort of the same thing as the rest of your offense. And you're becoming sort of redundant, I think, at this point, now that they've added Cole as well. So I do think he's not necessarily as great of a fit as a lot of people think, because he isn't a great yak guy. His broken tackles per reception average this past season was about half of the wide receiver average, even though most of his receptions are in the short part of the field where he has opportunities to break tackles. His yak numbers, again, are not as good as Crowder's. So I think what we've learned this past season with him is that this past season, he played the slot more than any other season in his career. He played more slot snaps than any player in the league, and he had his least efficient season in terms of yards per target by far. So I think what we learned this past season is that the slot, that underneath game, isn't necessarily something he could thrive with. And that those first 2 years when he's playing out wide more and getting a lot of deep shots, intermediate game, that's more of his specialty. And at this point, if you're swapping out Crowder for Smith-Schuster, I think then you're starting to have a really redundant skill set between him, Davis, and Mims, even though they're different body types, just in terms of what they do best. So that's sort of how I look at it with Smith-Schuster. There's a lot of upside, so I get it if they did go that route. But I do think there's downside, that there's decent potential you are downgrading quite significantly from Crowder if you do go with him.
Yeah. Do you think that signing Cole takes him out of the JuJu running? Do you think my suspicions are correct? There are some people that still believe that, look, Cole was a guy
I guess
that
I necessarily don't. They could still, if they really do like him that much, cut Crowder and go with Smith-Schuster. But again, I think we look back to this past season. If he's going to be your slot guy, this past season is when he saw him in the slot the most, and it's when he was arguably the least productive of his career in terms of efficiency. So it doesn't seem like that's the best role for him. And you already have your 2 outside guys penciled in and a third one, or 4th overall in terms of Cole. So I could still see it, but I would bet it wouldn't happen, but I think it definitely still could.
Economically, it probably makes more sense to draft somebody. I mean, at this point, with the amount of needs the Jets have a corner and interior offensive line, I mean, they could still take a receiver in round 3 or something, but it makes more sense to probably draft a receiver round 4 or something like that. And there's a lot of those speedier, shiftier slot guys this year. You could draft one of those guys, still have Crowder, and then this guy's, your 5th receiver. He's in the fold. And then once Crowder most likely doesn't return next year, he's a guy who could slide in. I agree. I mean, I think at this point they're probably out of the JuJu Smith-Schuster market. I would say their contract him probably still stands. They probably made a pretty good value, maybe 2 or 3 year deal to JuJu. I think they probably turned around and signed. There's 2 ways to look at it. Either they turned around, either they figured JuJu was using the Jets for leverage, or that he wasn't going to sign here, that he wanted a higher number and they couldn't come to terms, and they pivoted to Keenan Cole. Or this is just 2 separate moves, which there's that train of thought where it's like, this is our offer to JuJu, but this is Keenan Cole, guys, a guy who had a lot of interest around the league. We think
I throw something in here for 1 second before you continue. You're bothering me a little bit. Keelan Cole, not Keenan Cole.
That's what I said, Keelan Cole.
You keep saying Keenan Cole, like Keenan Allen. No, you're not.
I mean, I guess
you keep saying Keenan.
I swear I know it's Keelan. I'm working off of 3 hours of sleep here, Mike. But sorry, Keelan Cole. You're right. That's like I was making a mistake with somebody's name earlier. I keep saying Gerard Davis. Apparently, it's Jared Davis.
It is. I honestly didn't know that. So we're all
maybe I'm wrong there, but I keep hearing people say Jared Davis. I'm like, do I got that mispronounced?
Maybe they're
I've
wrong.
I've mispronounced so many damn names in this podcast. Okay,
I still don't know Harvey Lange's actual pronunciation.
Yeah, that was like having to learn Kalechi Assembly and
pronunciation. We pronounced wrong. But anyway.
All right. Well, thank you for correcting me. In my head, I was saying Keelan. I promise I know it was Keelan. Yeah, apologies for that. But you could make the argument that they're two separate transactions. That Keelan is, you're right. I was saying Keenan. Now that I look back on it, that Keelan was a guy they really were intrigued with as their fourth receiver, their punt returner, their gadget guy that you were talking about was a need. We didn't really bring up Cole. You were talking about Isaiah McKenzie, but you talked about how the Jets kind of needed this fourth receiver, this depth kind of gadget punt returner guy. I think he's a great fit in this offense, but they could still turn around and say, look, we want Crowder's still here. Like Keelan's not replacing him as that third receiver. So you could still turn around and sign JuJu for his contract wouldn't be that much more expensive than Crowder, have a younger slot receiver. So I don't think it completely takes him out of the market. I think it's probably less likely. I think Douglas probably has his line in the sand on JuJu. And I think he probably ends up returning. We'll see what happens, but I think they're probably out of the market for JuJu Smith-Schuster. But yeah, I love the signing of Keelan Cole. I think that was a terrific move. I think he's a guy who had 600 plus yards in a pretty terrible situation in Jacksonville. I don't think he's going to be relied to be a starter in this offense, but I think he's a great fit. I think, Mims in college was pretty durable, but last year there was definitely some injury question marks. If he goes down, if Corey Davis goes down, if Crowder is another guy who's had some not too bad injury question marks, but he seems to miss it, a game or two every year. You can count on Cole to come in and you're not playing Braxton Berrios, Chris Hogan, and Jeff Smith at receiver. You have a guy who has been a starter in this league and can put up numbers, and has a lot of fans across the league. So I like the signing. I think it was a really smart move for the Jets. It makes more sense than, I guess, doubling down at the premium receivers. They still could do it. The argument is that the Jets whiffed on Tooney, so you can take his money and spend it elsewhere. But Douglas isn't going to build this thing overnight. I think he's probably set his line in the sand for JuJu. If he meets it, great. The Jets are going to double dip there. But I think if not, this makes economically more sense. A very similar move in signing LaMarcus Joyner, because we talked about yesterday. I got to
talk about Cole, though. I didn't get my chance to talk about him.
Okay. I gave you the mic and you turned it back over to me to correct my pronunciation. I asked you, what are your thoughts on Keenan Cole? And then you're like, it's Keelan.
And you just said it again.
Fuck you. Go ahead.
Okay, so I do like this one quite a bit. He wasn't really on my radar because he didn't put up the big numbers playing in that terrible situation in Jacksonville. But now that they've signed him and I've gotten to look at some of his individual stuff a little bit more, there's a lot to like here. And he really checks the box of, I think prior to the signing, there were two things they needed at receiver. And one of them is what they still need. That's that gadget guy who could take end rounds, make plays on screens, things like that. Cole isn't that guy, but he is a deep threat. I think he is that fourth guy who could throw a couple deep shots, also makes plays intermediate too. But he's that guy, that number 4 explosive big play threat. And he is actually really good with contested catches. He has caught 19 of his 29 contested targets over the past 3 seasons. That's 65.5%. That's the best among all wide receivers over that span, with at least 20 contested targets, which I was surprised to see. He's only 6'1", 194, but that's great to know. So they have another good contested guy alongside Davis and Mims. He's also a good blocker with above the 70th percentile in terms of PFF's run blocking grade last season. So another thing that Davis and Mims do well that he also does, something that's very important in this offense, to have receivers who can block well. So he checks those 2 boxes, and he's great deep as well. He, over his first 3 seasons, was consistently in the top 10 to 20% among wide receivers in terms of his catch rate and his yards per target on deep passes. This past season, he had a down year in terms of deep catches, but you could blame that on quarterbacking because, he had Gardner Minshew, Mike Glennon, Jake Luton, all some of the worst deep passers in the league. But the first 3 years, and still not with great quarterbacks, Minshew, Bortles, he was one of the best, most efficient deep receivers in the league. So deep production, contested catches, run blocking, those are the 3 things you get with Cole. So I think he fits that 4th receiver spot very well.
Yeah, I'm glad you circled back here because there's one other point I want to talk about, because you mentioned contested catches. It seems like Joe Douglas in his tenure here, and Mims was added for a different offense and he traded down. So maybe he wasn't, the top guy he was targeting originally, but it seems like the 3 receivers that Douglas has added, including Brashad Perriman, who signed with the Lions, congrats to him. It's been focused on contested catches, guys. These in this offense, people are assuming that it's going to be a Shanahan copy. It's definitely going to be more of a blend between his brother's offense and his mentor's offense. But that Shanahan offense really values that separation. And it doesn't really seem like any of the guys the Jets have signed or added are really separation monsters. I mean, clearly the yak is important, and I think they've added some guys who can really do that. May not have the production to back it up, but I think in this offense we'll be putting up that yak. I think that's something you can generate depending on which offense you're in. But separation is something that pretty much, I mean, you can generate it through a scheme, but you can tell what type of player can create separation just based off their tape. It seems like the Jets are valuing more of those contested catch guys, which isn't something I really expected. It's something that we kind of talked with Oscar about when we were breaking down this LaFleur offense, and he was saying that, like, Mims isn't actually a perfect fit in this offense, that he's going to have to channel the 2016 Julio Jones role for him, and they're going to have to find ways to get him involved, and that they're going to focus on getting guys who can get separation. But with Corey Davis and Keelan Cole, it seems like they're prioritizing guys who can get those contested catches. So what are your thoughts on that? Is that to you saying that this offense is, first of all, this is Mike LaFleur's offense? This isn't Kyle Shanahan's offense. This isn't Matt LaFleur's offense. I guess kind of what are your takeaways? Do you think that's just something that's incidental? Do you think that that they still believe that they can get that separation from him just due to the scheme? Just kind of what are your thought process on the type of receiver the Jets are adding? Because I think it's kind of surprising to me, at least.
Yeah, I do think it is very interesting because these two signings definitely don't fit in with, I think, the prototype matching the 49ers offense that we kind of thought they would do. So it definitely seems like that the offense, were, at least based on these two signings, it's really early. We'll see what else they do and what they do at guard as well. Once they did sign one, but hopefully he doesn't play. We'll talk about him. But it seems like based on these two signings that this very well could be an offense that is not as similar to what the Niners have been running as I think we've assumed it would be. I think it really could be. You'll obviously see a lot of those same principles because that's generally the case. Coaches take over a good amount of what they inherited and learned from their previous stops, their previous coaching tree. But it does seem like that this could be a really uniquely spun offense in Mike LaFleur's sort of personal style, because Denzel Mims and Corey Davis is nothing like the wide receiver duos that the Niners have been throwing out over the past few seasons. So it will be interesting to see how similar and how different this offense is compared to what San Francisco did, because the group they have is certainly not and also Crowder as well. The Niners have not featured the slot receiver at all over the past few seasons. They haven't had that go-to slot guy. Which is what Crowder is. So he's not a fit in that either. So this wide receiver group does not look anything like what the Niners have been throwing out the past few seasons. So
it does look more like Green Bay's.
Right. This is definitely an offense that, and Green Bay actually is a really good comparison. Their blocking is a common theme with their receivers. They have a number one guy in Adams, who is a contested catch, big bodied guy. So it is more similar to that. So I think, like you said, it could very well be a blend of sort of the Shanahan look, but also his brother over in Green Bay. So this is an offense I think is, at least based on these moves, probably not going to be as Niners-esque as we might have thought coming in.
Yeah, I think Joe Douglas and Robert Saleh sat down, and when they were deciding kind of the philosophy for their team, and we've heard it preached, they want guys who are physical. They want guys who eat, sleep, and crap football, according to Peter Schrager. They want guys that are going to take your will every Sunday, that want to be a New York Jet. It seems like that's what they're prioritizing more so, because the more I've been reading about Corey Davis, the more you learn about how much of a football nut this guy is. And that receiver blocking is a trait that, there's a lot of receivers out there that are more interested in getting their 10 touchdowns a year and don't really worry too much about the run game. But especially in this game, if you have receivers who can block outside, I mean, you're adding 5, 10, hell, even 50 yards to runs occasionally. That receiver blocking does matter, and it can open up those long touchdown runs that the Jets have really lacked in years past. I like that identity that they're adapting. They want to be bigger. They want to be stronger. They want to be more physical. They want to take your soul. And yeah, I think it's probably, at least from the receiver mold, probably going to be more Green Bay. I think they're going to run more 11 personnel than we thought they might, but I still think you're going to see a lot of Shanahan principles, a lot of 12 personnel. It's going to be a blend, and he's going to have his own stamp on it. I think I'm very intrigued. Michael LaFleur is a guy who's well regarded around the league as a young, up and coming offensive mind, and the Jets actually have him in the building. So I'm curious to see what he whips up. but yeah, I think it's going to be less of a carbon copy of Shanahan than we thought it would be. But plowing ahead, LaMarcus Joyner, kind of similar to what we were just talking about with JuJu Smith-Schuster, because there's another guy in the market, Keanu Neal, we talked about yesterday, who, again, they could still sign. They could still have him play will linebacker. He played a lot of linebacker last year. But again, there was a hole for the Jets. There was a need. It wasn't necessarily an urgent need, but there's a guy in the market there that still available that you could give a sizable contract to it and knock that need out. But I like the signing of Joyner. I think he's pretty much perfect for what the Jets are looking for. I thought maybe they could go Neal. They still could, as I said. I thought maybe they could go Tart because he has experience and saw his defense. But those two guys, those are starting safeties in this league. I mean, those are guys who could start for more than half the team. Maybe not more than half, but at least half the teams in this league. Joyner's a guy who I think could start for a few teams, had success at safety with the Rams, wasn't as good at slot corner with the Raiders, but he's perfect for what the Jets are looking for. I mean, there's some question marks about how Davis and May fit together. I think that this doesn't point to Douglas being concerned about that. I still think the plan is for May to be the starting free safety and Davis to be the starting strong safety, and probably do a little bit of both. But Joyner gives them flexibility. They can play that big nickel package. It gives them a strong safety who is starting experience, who has thrived in this league before. It just gives you flexibility. Very cheap deal, 1 year. I like the signing. Michael, what do you think about Joyner?
Yeah, it's definitely, you needed a third safety because it is going to be used occasionally. I don't think you'll see a ton of a third safety during a game like the Niners last year, for example. They put a third safety on the field for about 7 snaps a game on average, and that was very it fluctuated a lot. Like there'd be games where they never used one, but there'd be games where that they'd have a third safety in for like 20 snaps, and the Jets did that a couple games last year, like Ashton Davis against the Niners. Actually, in the second game, he played about 20 snaps in addition to May McDougal playing the whole game. So it is something that you see a lot in the NFL now, and more so with both the Niners and the Falcons did it last year more than the Jets did. So it is something that's important. So you do need a third guy you can rely upon, even though he doesn't play a ton. And you also need depth as well. So you throw in Joyner, and now the Jets don't have to think about safety at all in the draft, and they can focus on the rest of the positions that they have much bigger holes at. But for Joyner, he played slot corner mostly for the Raiders over the past couple seasons, and that didn't go too well for him. It was a role that he struggled in, and based on the tweet also with Rappaport, it seemed like he knew that and he wanted to go back to safety. But he played primarily free safety with the Rams over the last 2 years that he spent there, from 2017 to 18. And he was really good over those 2 years. He was actually PFF's second best safety in 2017. And he was still pretty good in 2018 at the 67th percentile in overall grade. His coverage was solid over those 2 years, 3 touchdowns allowed, 4 picks, only 0.3 yards per cover snap allowed, which is great. And his tackling is really good too. He only had 7 missed tackles over those 2 seasons, the 4th lowest missed tackle rate among safeties over those 2 years. So he's a very efficient tackler. And also PFF put out a tweet looking at his grades between all the roles he's played in the league. And by far, comparing against slot corner and playing in the box, free safety is where he's played his best football by far. So it is going to be interesting to see how he'll fit in. Is he going to compete with Davis to start? Is he just going to fill right in as that third safety and backup while Davis still starts? It'll be interesting, but you can't go wrong with adding more depth, more experience, a guy who's not only played safety, but played it very well. He is 30 years old. He'll be 31 during the season, and we know DBs can tail off at that point. All those safeties do tend to sometimes age well because it is a very cerebral position. But we'll see where he fits in. At the worst, you're getting good depth, a guy who's experienced, and this is a league with 3 safety. Having 3 good safeties is important, and now they have that. So this is a position that they don't have to think about at all in the draft.
Yeah, I like the signing. I think similar to the Cole signing, smart, economical, is a guy that I think could play a bigger role next year. These are the type of signings that, especially if May or Davis, who have both had their own injury issues in the past, go down, this is a guy that can slide in and you're confident can produce. This is not Matthias Farley starting 5+ games for the Jets or whatever. This is a guy that I think you should be confident in that safety position. Can play free safety, can play strong safety, can play the nickel corner if needed. Yeah, I'm a big fan of the signing. Another weapon for Robert Saleh. I think you're going to see a lot of these types of signings over the weekend. Just kind of these economic, smart, low budget type of moves where they project they can get more out of a player. Yeah, I think this is a good signing by the Jets. But perhaps their biggest signing of the day, Dan Feeney, offensive lineman from the Chargers. No, I'm just kidding.
In literal terms.
Yeah, in literal terms, he does look like an extra on Duck Dynasty. I mean, with that mullet and that mustache combo.
And he does play like one too.
Yeah, okay,
so
that's true.
Gave up
Yeah.
the most pressures amongst. He played center last year, most pressures amongst centers, third most pressures among guards in 2019, most pressures among guards in 2018. So he's pretty bad, I think.
Yeah,
you could say.
Let's not delude ourselves here. He's not good. It doesn't mean it's a terrible signing. I think he's a guy who competes for a spot in training camp. I think he's more of a Pat Elflein or Josh Andrews replacement. He's still relatively young. That's something that we've seen has been a trend across most of Douglas's free agent signings. I think he's only 25 or 26. So it's a guy that maybe you're hoping with the scheme change can be a good fit. The best case scenario is, I mean, look at a guy like Brandon Shell last year who leaves and Jets fans pretty much trash him as being terrible. He goes to Seattle. He's not amazing, but he actually had a bounce back season with Seattle. So you're kind of hoping the scheme change can at least get into a solid level. But yeah, this is not a guy that the Jets are going to be counting on to start multiple games unless somebody goes down. I'm glad they did something on the interior offensive line, but I think still there's more moves to be made. I guess first, Michael, your thoughts on Feeney outside of what you just said. And then second, Ibushi still out there, Trey Turner still out there. Do you think that the Jets starting guard or one of their starting guards is in free agency, or do you think that they're both going to be rookies? Do you think it's going to be the Louis Van Roten show again with the rookie? Do you think they got to make a trade? I guess kind of your thoughts on the interior of the offensive line.
Yeah, this is definitely the one thing, because I like this offseason quite a bit so far. The few moves that have been made, I do like. They obviously still have to make a cornerback move. If they don't make a move there, that's a problem as well. But there are enough good names out there to where you can feel confident they will do something at some point. So that's important as well. But the guard spots, they're in a really tough position here. And again, you can't blame them for what happened with Lindsley and Tooney. It's just two guys. They went to teams that are in much better spots than they are. So you can't blame them for missing out on those guys, but it's just an unfortunate predicament that they have all this cap space and there are only two legitimate starters available. Those are the only two superstars, but even beyond them, there's just not really any other good starters, period. Just even decent guys. But Oday Ibushi is probably the only other one, and he's still out there. So they could look at him if they buy into his improvement last season. So I think that is something. I think they should go after Ibushi. He's the only at least slightly enticing guard option left. So I think they should look at it. But beyond him, there's not much there. So it will be interesting to see what they do. Will they explore the trade market? And then you're going into the draft in this position where it's sort of like you almost have to draft one, or else you're going to be really thin there. So that's not a great spot to be in terms of draft flexibility. So I like a lot about this offseason, but this is a really tough spot. And it's not necessarily their fault, again, for missing out on those two guys, Lindsley and Tooney. Although it seemed like they weren't even
more Tooney.
Tooney. More so Tooney. But again, just one guy who decided to go to the two-time reigning AFC champs. You can't blame them. But it's a tough spot, mostly just because of not missing out on him, but just the state of this free agent market being really weak at guard. So Cameron Clark's development is going to be huge. If he can step up and take a second-year leap and be a competent starter, that would be absolutely massive for them to get that in-house development to fill one spot, and hopefully you can put a rookie in the other one, maybe a Bushi or some other stopgap, not Feeney. Hopefully doesn't start because he just hasn't been good at all.
Is he better or worse than Pat Elflein?
I think it's a wash. I mean, at least he's been Feeney's been trusted to start every single game,
and he's a lot cheaper than Elflein.
So the Chargers had to see something in him to let him start every single game the past 3 seasons, but it's not like the Chargers have had a revered offensive line, and they're putting a lot of effort into fixing it, partially because of how bad he was. So he's pretty bad. I don't think he should be starting, but it'll be interesting to see what they do at guard. There's not a lot of options pre-draft.
Yeah. I mean, look, the guard, Oscar was, when we were breaking down the position value for this offense, the guard spots are not necessarily priorities in this offense, but you do want guys who can hold their own. I haven't really been thinking too much about Cameron Clark. I think the fact that he didn't play as a rookie was kind of a sign that, okay, this is a guy that was really raw. He had a redshirt year. But yeah, I mean, we talked about when they drafted him that they're trying to build this pipeline of having young players that when their older counterparts leaving free agency or they're bad and get replaced or whatever, you can have these young day 3 picks come in and play meaningful reps and start. I think Clark, look, he balls out in preseason. He should certainly be a starter. I think he's probably more this season in that role where he's going to try to get on the field, be that depth option, and then, hopefully can prove himself as a starter throughout the season. That would agree. I mean, obviously it would be the best case scenario for the Jets. But yeah, Feeney for me doesn't move the needle. I think that they still need to make some more moves there. But yeah, I don't like being pigeonholed into having to take an interior offensive lineman in the draft, but there should be some good prospects there at 23, especially between Mayfield and Vera Tucker. I think one of those guys is going to be there. Mayfield's a guy who played tackle in college, but I think could slide inside the guard and have a good career. There's a number of those guys. Wyatt Davis is another one who should be available at 34. I don't think they need to double dip. I think you can probably survive. I mean, we talked about it yesterday on how the Rams didn't make any changes in their offensive line, and it was pretty much just coaching that turned him around. And I think John Benton is a really highly respected offensive line coach. I think this is a better scheme for a lot of guys like McGovern, especially McGovern and Fan are two guys I think can really improve on their performance last year. Not only the continuity of being on the same offensive line and not being new, but also I just think the scheme fits their skill set a lot better. So I think they could definitely take a jump. I think they probably need to take one between 23 and 34, but whichever one, let's say they take an offensive lineman at 23, I think 34, just based off positional need, probably needs to go to cornerback. And speaking of cornerback, Michael, as we've done at the end of all these podcasts, I guess, who's still out there for the Jets that you want them to pursue? Day 4 was a lot more active, a lot more names kind of left the market, but we have a whole weekend here where I think Douglas is going to make some moves. He's going to be busy. Are there any names that still stick out to you? JuJu still in the market. Keanu Neal. I don't think Joyner necessarily excludes the Jets from signing Neal. I think it just makes it less likely. But look, if they're comfortable with Neal being more of that will linebacker, Joyner played more free safety than strong safety, so you can get more of a prototypical box safety in there. So those are probably the two biggest fishes on the market. But there's plenty of solid contributors across the landscape. Who are some names that Jets fans should keep an eye out as we head into Friday?
I think Kyle Fuller is a really interesting addition to the cornerback market. He's really good. And, he only was released by the Bears because he had a very big cap number, which I believe is 20 million. So, which they still probably should have been willing to deal with because he is that good. So he's a very interesting late addition to the market. It seems like Denver was interested in him the most based on the early reports. So maybe the Jets won't be in on him, but Dory Jackson still out there, corner. Then the veterans on 1-year deals, Sherman and Rhodes. They got to get one of those. They should at least try to get one of those guys. Getting a cornerback on the outside is huge. It's going to be tough to go into the draft with your outside corners being Bless Austin and Bryce Hall. And we're mostly talking about Austin. Obviously, Hall has great upside. I think they're going to be okay with him starting. We'll see what happens, but you can feel good with him going in. But that other spot, you need something there because you don't want to rely on a rookie to start right away. It's a tough position to play as a rookie. And obviously, Bless Austin showed us last year he's probably not starting material. So that's a huge need. They need some help there. And then in the slot, still have K'Wan Williams and Brian Poole out there. So one of those guys, you have links to both. Poole having played here the past couple seasons and Williams with the Saleh connection. Those are two of the best slot corners in the league. Poole in 2019, fewest yards per cover snap allowed out of the slot. 2020, it was K'Wan Williams who led in that category. So one of those two guys in the slot would be huge as well.
When you turn around and look at the offense, that tight end spot and that running back position, those are two spots where the Jets could certainly add. I mean, they were the worst offense in all football last year. There's some question marks about Herndon. Do you think the Jets should try to look for guys in free agency, or do you think at this point they'd be better off? Look, they have so many damn picks that you can knock out running back and tight end in the 3rd round alone and get two really competent starters there, maybe not starters, but at least two competent players that can eventually be starters. Do you think that should be their strategy? Do you think that is their strategy? Or do you think there's some names in that market that they could still target?
I think there are some names. I think at running back, though, you already have P. Ryan's going to be here. Johnson's under contract, and you just re-signed Josh Adams. So that's three guys I think you can feel okay about. Adams and Johnson played great last year. P. Ryan was just drafted by P. Ryan didn't play too well last year, or even close to as good as those guys, but he was drafted by Douglas just a year ago. So I think those are three guys who are not necessarily all locks to make the roster, but we'll all be there in camp and are near locks, I guess. So I think at running back, they might be done, but Jerick McKinnon, Matt Breida, two guys, the Niners connection, who can catch the ball very well out of the backfield would be interesting to me if they do want to throw another name in there. At tight end, Dan Arnold, I think is interesting, has a name that's pretty similar to Sam Darnold, so that's a concern. But in terms of actually playing football, he was good last season. He was really one of the most efficient tight ends in the league. He had a touchdown or first down in over half of his targets, averaged almost 10 yards a target, and he's only 26. So Dan Arnold at tight end is interesting as well. And maybe they do look to fill out the tight end position in free agency so they could focus elsewhere in the draft. But
there's some exciting tight ends, though. Breven Jordan, Tommy Tremble. There's some exciting tight ends in that range.
Yeah, it definitely is a good tight end class, though. So at the same time, they could put off, maybe look at that in the middle rounds, but still so many other important needs. Maybe they try to, fill out the less important ones in free agency. They could go either way, but those are probably, I would say, McKinnon and Breida running back, if you are looking to add another guy, because it's pretty crowded already. And at tight end, I like Dan Arnold.
And then the backup quarterback spot, do you think we're still on the Nick Mullins train?
Yeah, I think so. I think that makes the most sense just because of the familiarity. It's not really a great market anyway. The Bills just got an amazing backup in Mitch Trubisky, so the Jets now have to fear him if Josh Allen goes down.
Hey, I think you're joking, but Mitch Trubisky is actually a pretty solid backup. I mean, I think the memes alone would dissuade me from ever wanting the Jets to sign him. But hey, that's a guy with starting experience. I mean, played all right. The Bears went to the playoffs, so he's not. I
mean, he's probably a top 5 backup.
Yeah, that's what I would say. What do you think about Flacco visiting with the Niners? Because we've talked about it. We don't really feel like he's a scheme fit, but
yeah, that's really because that's the first thing that came to mind. That you said that last time. Like, he's not a great scheme fit here, which you're right.
What the hell do I know?
I mean, Joe Flacco is probably one of the least athletic quarterbacks in the league, a relic from that, past era. But I don't know. I guess the Niners are okay with him. He showed some agility last season. He had some really good outside the pocket plays.
Well, he can't roll out. I mean, he's not like he has legs. It's just that
he has legs. That's on the scouting report.
He has 10 toes, 2 feet, and 2 legs. It's just, he's not. What do you think his 40 is? It's what, like in the 5s?
Probably like 5. I would say like I my guess would be 5.24.
So Becton runs a faster 40?
Yes.
That's honestly kind of incredible. Last free agent to talk about before we do our Joe Namath guarantee, which at this point we've been wrong every single one, so it's more the Rex Ryan
guarantee.
Just
gonna say Kerry Hyder.
No, I was gonna make a caveat, but I don't think we talked about him yet. Dory Jackson, what are your thoughts on him?
By the way, Flacco ran a 4.84 way back in the day.
Yeah, way back. I don't even think I was watching football when he ran that time. So
that was in 2008.
Okay, that was pretty much my first year of actually like watching every single Jets game. So I can't imagine that number holds up too well. What are your thoughts on Dory Jackson, who hit the market from Tennessee? An intriguing player, high pedigree. What are your thoughts on the Jets potentially exploring him?
Yeah, I think he definitely is, sort of like Kyle Fuller, just a late addition, a young, good starting cornerback to the market. His numbers are interesting because PFF grades him really well, but he doesn't have the best coverage numbers for his career. He's given up 15 touchdowns with only 2 picks. So he doesn't have the most lockdown cover numbers, but I think it comes down to his playmaking that makes him really good. In terms of getting his hands on the ball, he's been very good at that. Even though he only has 2 picks, he has 33 passes defended over his first 3 seasons. So he gets his hands on the ball. He's very active against the run. So he's definitely an interesting one and would be an upgrade for this team. I don't necessarily think, at least just based on all the information that I'm looking at, that he's a great starter, but he's a good one, at least average.
And he's also
that would be great for this team.
And he's also kind of an example. Look, yeah, I would be curious. I would certainly do it for a 1-year deal, but he's that kind of guy that we were talking about with Shaq Griffin and Awuzie, other corners, I guess, but who are young, and you buy in on the youth, you buy in on the middling production, you buy in on that projection, and not necessarily projection based in, I shouldn't say based on anything, but you overpay for a guy based off the needs that you have in the market. And that's where those free agent contracts really look kind of brutal. It seems like Douglas's strategy, he's paying for guys that are highly productive, that you're very confident can come in and produce. There's not too much projection. The projection that there is, it's guys like Jared Davis. I guess I think I thought it was Gerard for all these years, but then I heard multiple announcers.
That's what I think.
I don't know, Team Jared or Team Gerard. I guess I'll say Jared. Jared Davis, at least there's you can make an argument that, look, he was in a different role. He's going to be playing more of the Sam linebacker. You look at his blitzing numbers, that he's going to fit in better with Robert Saleh's defense, etc. But those type of signings, I don't know necessarily if Dory Jackson fits this mold, but it seems like Douglas is more likely to take the path of signing a guy like Xavier Rhodes or Richard Sherman to a 1-year deal and then figure that spot out through the draft, rather than overpaying a long-term multi-year contract to a guy that might be average or mediocre, but you're going to play him like a good or a great player. So yeah, lastly, at this point, it's the Rex Ryan guarantee. Player you think the Jets sign on Friday. You can't be Kerry Hyder and it can't be K'Wan Williams. You have to go out of the box here.
All right. I'm going to go with Xavier Rhodes.
Xavier Rhodes. Okay. I like that. Yeah. You took mine, but whatever. I'm tempted to go Fuller. I don't think it gets done Friday though. And Fuller's kind of another example of what we're just talking about, where it seems like he's up. You're going to probably be overpaying for what you're going to get.
This is so much harder than it seems. Like, who would have picked Keelan Cole or Dan Feeney or LaMarcus Joyner today?
Yeah, I know. Fuller does have the Douglas connection, though, I will say. I think they'll definitely explore him. I just don't think it gets done tomorrow.
It seems like they were in on some of the big cornerbacks, though. Like they were mentioned for Shaq Griffin. I think there was some Jackson talk as well. So
yeah, but
they are interested.
Well, I think Douglas evaluated them properly. He probably lowballed them, but he just said, this is the number we're going to meet, and we're not going to overpay. And I like that strategy, but it does at times leave you in a position like the Jets are now, where it's like, well, we really have to get a corner in the draft now. But I think the goal is to sign somebody who can hold the fort while the rookie you probably draft at 34 or 23, depending, develops. I'll go to the offensive line. I'll say Ibushi. I think they keep adding to the offensive line.
I like it.
I think he makes a lot of sense. I think he makes a lot of sense. I think Douglas is going to keep adding guys to this offensive line, and I think you could see a situation where Lewis, Van Roten, Ibushi, Feeney could all go into training camp and they'll just compete. And not unlike Brian Winters getting cut, you might see Lewis get the axe, at the end of August instead of March, and then they get those cap savings. So it's like, I think that's probably what they'll do, and they'll just see who's going to perform in August. They're not going to, I think one of the things we've learned about Joe Douglas over the last 2 off seasons is a lot of times heading into the off season, there's these presumed cap casualties, and Douglas really does not cut them until he has a replacement in place. And sometimes they even stick in the roster. Brian Winters is a guy, obviously, last year who sticks out, but then he gets cut right at the end of the season. But I think Lewis and Van Roten are other examples where a lot of people were banking on the Jets cutting him before free agency, but in retrospect, kind of glad they did. And obviously they're not high level starters, but you're kind of glad the Jets have that continuity. All 5 of their starters in the offensive line are returning. Now you're just trying to build off of it. And who knows, maybe with the scheme change, they'll improve. I think that the biggest beneficiaries of the scheme change are going to be McGovern and Fant, but maybe a guy like Van Roten can take the leap from it. That's going to do it for us. Presuming they sign anybody, we'll be back tomorrow, breaking down day 5 of free agency, previewing the weekend. But you can follow us at CYJ Pod on Twitter. You can follow myself at Ben W. Blessington, Michael _Nania. can find this podcast wherever you listen to podcasts, iTunes, Spotify, Jets X Factor, the best place to go for Jets content. Michael, anything else?
I don't think so. Just keep in mind, it's Keelan Cole, not Keenan Cole.
Yeah, Keelan Cole. Thank you, Michael. Oh, actually, yes, really quickly, if you are able to, please rate and review on iTunes. That really helps our podcast out tremendously. I always forget to mention it, but that is a big boost to our podcast. But yeah, that's going to do it for us. Yeah, don't forget, kids, it's Keelan Cole, not Keenan Cole. Don't be like me. And I guess, I don't know if I'm willing to go on the fence that it's Jared Davis yet. We really have to figure, is it Gerard or Jared? I mean,
I was looking at, in the middle of this, I brought up a little thread here on the Lions Reddit, and it looks like their consensus is that it's Jared.
So it is Jared. There was a player, I'm trying to remember, who was the player last year that we had the exact same debate about, and we had to figure it out. Oh, it's going to kill me. No, it wasn't Lange. It was
Millette?
No, it wasn't Millette. It was somebody who had like a silent vowel in their name.
Owasso?
Oh, it was. Yeah, it was Owasso. That's who it was. I think I pronounced his name like 12 different times or 12 different ways in the same podcast. And then, you know,
Analuisi.
Yeah. I just started calling him Peanut. That was that was his nickname, but it really sounded like my nickname for him. Who, by the way, I think the Jets should resign. I think he might be have him and Davis at that Sam linebacker spot. Gives you more depth at the linebacker spot. Let's get out of here. We're talking about Patrick on Owasso. I don't even know. Still don't know how to pronounce his name. That'll do it for us. Thanks for listening. And as always, folks, don't let the Jets ruin your life.
Pass to work quickly. Down to 6 seconds. Carr going down again. And it's Quentin Williams this time for the Jets.
Over the middle in the air, picked off. Brian Poole to the end zone. Touchdown. Hunter to beat, and the punter brings him down. Braden Mann saved a touchdown, most likely.
Looks right. Fires a bomb down the right sideline again for Mims. What a catch by Denzel Mims.